I remember moving into the apartment like it was yesterday. I was filled with this hopeful energy, thinking that maybe a change of scenery in this big, orderly building would finally give me some peace. The hallways were spotless, the lawns perfectly maintained. I thought it might be a chance for me to meet people, to finally make some friends. The silence was reassuring. It felt safe. But those friendships never happened. I ended up keeping to myself, spending nearly all my time at that small desk, scraping by with freelance jobs that barely covered the rent. At first, the walls felt thick, like they'd shield me from everything outside. It was comforting, like I was wrapped up in a cocoon. But now it feels like the walls are breathing. In the beginning, everything felt fine. I appreciated the quiet, the space to be alone. I'd sit in my cramped room, my desk pressed up against the one window that looked out over a narrow alley, and I'd work. City sounds drifted through the thin walls, the constant hum of traffic, distant sirens, sometimes arguments from other apartments. But in here, I felt separate from it all, like I had my own little corner of calm. And then I found the hole. I only noticed it by accident one night when I was rearranging the furniture. My old fridge was heavy, and as I shoved it closer to the wall, it scraped the floor with an awful sound. That's when I spotted it, a dark little gap tucked away behind the fridge. It was strange. Just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. A small passage, almost too precisely shaped, like it had been carved out on purpose. As if it had been waiting for me to find it. I tried to ignore it at first. I pushed the fridge back and told myself it was just one of those odd things you find in old buildings, quirky little spaces, abandoned corners no one paid attention to. But that hole, it wouldn't leave my mind. Every time I sat down to work, thoughts of it would creep back, nagging at me. I kept wondering what might be inside. Where could it possibly lead? My curiosity finally got the better of me. One night, I pulled the fridge back, and there it was again, dark and almost inviting. I climbed in, feeling the stale, chilly air wrap around me as I wedged my way forward. It didn't take long before the tight passage opened up into a hidden hallway. The walls in there were damp, the air thick with the smell of mildew. Trash was scattered along the floor, old clothes, candy wrappers, bits of who knows what else. I knew I should have turned back then and there, but something about that hidden hallway, it felt like it was calling to me. Like it was made for me. The first time I squeezed through that hole, I noticed how tight the passage was. The air was thick, humid, making it hard to breathe as I crawled on my hands and knees. The walls brushed against me, wet and clammy, almost like some kind of living thing. The space seemed to pulse around me. My skin prickled with unease, but I couldn't turn back. I kept moving, pulled by a strange urge, until I found myself looking through a peephole. On the other side was a young couple. They were laughing, sitting close on a couch, happy and content, like nothing in the world could touch them. I watched, barely breathing. They had no idea I was there. But something about them, the way they looked at each other, so peaceful, it reminded me of something I'd lost. I don't know how long I stayed there, but suddenly, the man turned and looked right at the wall where I was peeking. My heart skipped a beat. For a second, I thought he could see me, like his eyes locked onto mine, even though he shouldn't have been able to. I scrambled back, my hands shaking. But I couldn't stop myself. I moved forward, toward the next apartment. With each apartment, the scenes only got stranger. In one, a group of friends was playing video games, their music blasting loud enough to shake the walls. Their laughter filled the air, almost mocking. They were so wrapped up in their world, so completely unaware as I leaned closer, wishing I could be a part of their easy happiness. But I wasn't, I was just a shadow, a ghost in their space. Then I came to another room, and I wish I hadn't looked. Inside, there was an elderly woman, bent over as she worked on some knitting in the dim light. Her fingers, frail and bony, trembled as they moved the yarn. She reminded me so much of my grandmother. But when she turned her head slightly, I saw her face, sunken eyes, hollow cheeks, like she was already halfway to the grave. I stepped back, struggling to breathe as it felt like the walls were pressing in around me. Then I heard something violent. The sound reached me before I saw anything. A heavy, dull thud, like flesh hitting flesh, then the sick crunch of breaking bones. My stomach twisted as I looked through the peephole. A man was standing over a woman's limp body, his chest heaving, his face twisted with rage. Blood spattered the floor, staining the walls around them. The woman's eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, empty and lifeless. I wanted to scream, to run for help, to do anything, but I was paralyzed, my hand frozen against the wall. The man stood there, towering over her, breathing heavily. And then, without warning, he looked up. Right at me. His lips curled into a slow, sick smile, like he knew I was watching. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. What the hell was this place? Who had created this hidden passageway? And was I the only one who knew it existed? My head was spinning with questions, but before I could run, my eyes caught sight of another door. This one was different. A soft light glowed from underneath, spilling into the dark hallway, pulling me in like the hole had done before. I approached it slowly, breath unsteady, and pressed my eye to the peephole. This room was unlike any of the others. Mirrors lined the walls, each one framed with lights like in a backstage dressing room. Costumes were scattered all over, feathered boas, glittery dresses, hats in every style imaginable. And in the center of the room was a single chair, facing a mirror. Something inside me shifted. I pushed the door open and stepped in. The air here was warmer, somehow comforting. In front of me stood a large mirror, surrounded by lights like a theater makeup station. Old costumes and props lay tossed around, like remnants of an old movie set. My breathing slowed as I took it all in, this odd, familiar feeling filling me up. I moved closer to the mirror. My reflection looked back, but something was wrong with it. My face looked distorted. The longer I stared, the more it started to move on its own. It smiled when I didn't, tilting its head, eyes narrowing like it was trying to see right through me. I bolted out of there, heart pounding. Practically threw myself back into my apartment, diving through the hole. That twisted smile, that image of the man who'd killed his wife, I couldn't shake it. I needed to escape, to put it all out of my head. But that hole behind the fridge, it stayed with me, like a dark invitation I couldn't ignore. I needed to breathe, to think straight. Should I call the police? I walked to the kitchen, hands trembling, and poured myself a glass of water. I stared out at the dimly lit parking lot below, trying to steady myself. Something felt wrong. Maybe I was just imagining things. As night fell, I decided that sleep was the only escape I had left, the only way to push back the horrors of the day. But as darkness settled over me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The walls seemed to whisper, and shadows drifted at the edge of my vision. Then came a sound, a soft, rustling noise, like fabric brushing against skin. My heart leapt as I sat up, squinting through the dark. In the corner of my room, there was a figure, dark and looming, hovering just out of reach. I couldn't move, couldn't even scream. When I finally managed to flick on the light, the figure shifted, taking on shapes of my room. The shadow stretched, bending until it seemed to breathe on its own. It lunged toward me, but before it could reach me, it melted away, like smoke vanishing into the air. The next morning, I woke up disoriented. Was it all just a nightmare? Sunlight seeped in through the blinds, casting an eerie light across the room. Shaky, I stumbled into the kitchen, the memory of that dark figure still sharp in my mind. I needed coffee, something to ground me. As the coffee brewed, I tried to push back the dread creeping in. That's when my eyes fell on the fridge, or rather, behind it. The hole was still there, bigger than before. This wasn't just in my head. Maybe there was a peeping Tom in the building. I decided to talk to the landlord. I stepped out into the hall, ready to confront him, but the hallway was empty. Not a sound, not a single door cracked open. I knocked on a few doors, but there was no answer. The silence was unsettling, but maybe most of the tenants were still asleep. Just as I was about to turn back to my apartment, I noticed a man all dressed in black, struggling with a heavy bag. His movements were jerky and rushed, almost like he was on edge. "Hey!" I called out, trying to sound casual. "Hey, excuse me, can you?" But he acted like he hadn't heard me and hurried into the elevator. Right before the doors closed, I caught sight of something red slipping out of the bag. My heart raced as I realized, it was blood. It was him, the man I'd seen before, the one who killed that woman. I stumbled back, a wave of horror flooding over me. Legs like jelly, I bolted up the stairs, barely making it to my door before bursting inside. I rushed to the fridge, hands shaking, needing to know. I shoved the fridge away, my hands trembling. And there it was again, that dark, gaping hole behind it, staring back at me like a black void. Was any of this even real? Panic bubbled up in me. I scrambled for my phone to call the police, but nothing. The signal was dead. No bars. Then, from deep inside the hole, a soft whisper slithered out, freezing me to the bone. "Come in," it called, the voice low and smooth, pulling me in like a siren song, promising some kind of peace. "No," I murmured, backing away in a panic. I tried to cover the hole with my hands, but every time I turned away, it was still there, growing larger, its darkness calling to me. Then came the voices, soft, melodic, coaxing me to return. "Come back," they whispered. "We can make you whole again." Before I could stop myself, I found myself crawling through the hole, panic wrapping around me as I squeezed into the narrow space. The air felt different this time, thicker, pressing down on me like the walls themselves were alive, tightening around me. I moved forward, seeing the same scenes as before, couples laughing, friends hanging out, but this time, the laughter felt hollow, almost wrong. A chill spread over my skin, the hair on my arms prickling. I kept moving, knowing I had to face whatever waited in the darkness. And then I found him. The room was the same as before, each item in its place, eerily untouched. Only now, there was something new, a body lying in the corner, pale and sickly, with fingernails long and filthy, like he'd been rotting here for ages. I reached out, touched him, and watched as his skin decayed beneath my fingers, a dark liquid oozing from his flesh, like he'd been dead for a century. I had found him. The peeping Tom, lying dead in the shadows. I felt a change stirring inside me, like something was shifting in my bones. My skin grew pale and clammy, my fingers stretching unnaturally long, reaching for something I couldn't quite grasp. I caught sight of myself in a nearby mirror, and the reflection staring back was hideous, warped into something barely human. I touched my face, my skin cold and wet, my features twisting in the mirror's warped glass. Around me, the walls of my apartment pulsed, as if they were alive, veins pushing and contracting just beneath the surface. I scratched at them, desperate to get out. "What's happening to me?" I gasped, clawing at the fleshy walls. My fingers sank in, like they were sinking into skin, and the walls gave way, soft and damp. Then suddenly, I woke up. I was back in my bed. Was it all just a dream? No, that couldn't be right. I dragged myself to the kitchen to make coffee, still haunted by that dark figure and my own monstrous reflection. I glanced toward the fridge, where the hole sat like a hungry mouth. It had grown even bigger. The smell of brewing coffee did nothing to ease the dread curling in my stomach. My eyes kept drifting back to the fridge, where the hole waited, dark and deep. I couldn't ignore it. Tonight, I had to go back in. As night crept in, I sat alone in the dim light of my apartment, nerves tingling with a strange mix of fear and excitement. The coffee had gone cold, and the shadows around me stretched long, pressing in. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The moment I crawled back through the hole, that cold feeling washed over me again, pulling me into its dark embrace. The corridor opened before me, a twisting path that seemed to breathe, drawing me deeper. Each step echoed through the darkness, anticipation building inside me like a pulse. The scenes returned, laughter, love, sorrow, and violence, all swirling around me like fragments of memories. Each moment tugged me closer to some dark truth hiding just out of reach. Moving along that narrow corridor, I glimpsed lives unfolding on every side, feeling the steady beat of the building underfoot. Then I stumbled into a room cluttered with old clothes and costumes, pieces of lives that didn't belong to me. My gaze landed on a bowler hat resting on a chair. I reached for it, settling it onto my head, and gazed into the mirror. Suddenly, I felt lighter, like a weight had lifted off my chest. I wasn't me anymore. I started spinning, laughing, twirling in front of my reflection. The hat slipped down, almost covering my eyes, and for a moment, I forgot it all, the blood, the darkness. It was just me, the mirror, and a strange feeling of not being so alone. But when I tipped the hat back up, my reflection wasn't moving. It was frozen, watching me, grinning wide, eyes unblinking. And then, behind me, I saw something shift. I kept swaying, as if dancing to an unseen beat, caught up in a strange freedom, shedding the old me. The people in this building, they didn't know me. They couldn't see me. But I saw them. I was with them, their lives and secrets now woven into mine. I was the one who watched. The one who knew. I was the peeping Tom. No longer just a lonely writer barely scraping by in a cramped apartment, I was something more. I was the one who slipped through the walls, the one who saw everything, the one who danced in the shadows while they went about their oblivious little lives. The hole had made me whole. It had always been me. The watcher. The lurker. These people weren't strangers anymore, they were my family, my friends. And the man who'd killed that woman, he was part of it, too. He didn't know I'd seen him, but it didn't matter. I had his secret now, and that made him mine. I laughed, a real laugh, and it felt good. When was the last time I'd laughed like that? I stood, adjusting the hat, and strolled back down the corridor. The doors, the rooms, the people, this was my world now, my hidden empire. When I made it back to the hole, back to my little apartment, I felt complete. Madness had swallowed me up, and reality had become part of me. The hole had been waiting. This place had been waiting. And now that I was here, I saw everything clearly. As I sit here, typing out a story I almost wish no one would read, know this, I am the peeping Tom. And maybe, just maybe, I'm watching you right now. As you read these words, as your eyes scan the screen in your quiet little life, maybe I'm right behind you. Just out of sight. Watching. Waiting. You're not alone, I'm with you, because now, you're my friend. If you want to meet me, maybe crawl into a hole like I did, you might even find me there. Or maybe, you'll become the next me.